Good evening. Good evening. That's more like it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Abena Sankofa Imhotep, board member of the Des Moines Public Library Foundation. The library has been hosting AViD since 2001, and we are so happy that you all are here. The Des Moines Public Library Foundation is honored to support library programs like AViD each year, and I would like to thank our donors who make AViD possible. Prairie Meadows, Nationwide Foundation, Brad and Kelly Edmister, Karen Schaff and Stephen Jane, Pamela Bass Bookie and Harry Bookie, Humanities Iowa, a state-based affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, Mary Kay and Daniel M. Kelly Family Foundation, Cultivating Compassion, the Dr. Richard Deming Foundation, Shelley and Martin Brody, Deborah and Douglas West, Dory Briles, Judy Blank, Jan Freed and John Fisher, Rachel Stauffer and Jim Lawson, and Don Taylor. Let's give them a round of applause. Offering outstanding authors for AViD, free programs, the latest technology, and new initiatives takes more money than our tax dollars can provide. Please help us continue to make a difference with your gift to the Library Foundation. You can find donation envelopes outside the doors at our table. They look just like this. A few details. Please complete the evaluation form. It looks like this. Turn it in at the information table, or you can complete it online. Your evaluations help us secure future funding for AViD. Purchase a book from Beaverdale Books and have your book autographed by the author. 10% of the sales are donated to the foundation. And now, our moderator tonight is Denise Williams. Denise is a contemporary romance author based here in Des Moines. She was the recipient of an Iowa Author Award in 2023. Her books include Technically Yours, How to Fail at Flirting, The Fastest Way to Fall, and many more. Please help me welcome Denise to the stage.
Are such a good-looking audience. Do you know how good you look? Just look around and take it in. Now, I need to know, how many of you are regular romance readers? Oh, I love it. How many of you are new to romance or you've never picked up a romance novel in your life? We're so glad you're here. You're about to get quite an education. It is such an honor to be on this stage, to share it with Jasmine, and to be here with all of you. Isn't this a magical place? Libraries are a magical place. And this one in particular is filled with staff and volunteers who do the incredible work of sharing books and building community. I love the library. I know you do too. And as we begin, I'd like you to give a raucous romance reader round of applause for the library staff and volunteers who are here. And I've read love scenes to rooms full of people. That's not what we're doing tonight, but that truly was representative of what romance readers can do for a raucous applause. Jasmine and I are going to chat on stage, but I have been an educator for almost 20 years, so we're going to ask that you ask questions as well. So if you haven't already, please write down your questions on the cards that are on your seat. You can raise them up in the air. Please don't toss them at our volunteers, but they will come and grab them from you and bring them to stage. And again, I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but I've been an educator for 20 years, so if I don't get any raised hands, I will just begin calling on people. Please do share your questions with us. We'd like to answer them. Jasmine will be signing books over here or outside the venue or nearby with Beaverdale Books, and we'll have copies for purchase. In addition to our wonderful library system, we are blessed with several romance-friendly, like underlined romance-friendly indie bookstores here in Des Moines, including Beaverdale Books. So we call that like friends to lovers, romance-friendly to lovers. And so we're really thankful that they're here. But without further ado, we'll get this show on the road, and I have the opportunity to introduce Jasmine. Jasmine Guillory has been dubbed the, you can clap. You can clap. Jasmine Guillory has been dubbed the undisputed queen of the modern-day romance by Vogue and is a beloved best-selling author of novels like The Wedding Date, The Proposal, While We Were Dating, Drunk on Love, and many more, all featuring ambitious Black women as they navigate careers and romance. And like they have some pleasurable times along the way. Told you, education. She is a regular contributor to the Today Show and speaks to audiences like you about the importance of writing Black heroines, her career pivots, and more. She is generous in uplifting other authors, something I experienced personally when I almost crashed my car after receiving the following text in all caps from my cousins. Jasmine Guillory is holding your book on the Today Show! One should not look at their phone while driving, one definitely should not read text messages, and one certainly should not do that when someone as kind and delightful as Jasmine is in your corner. Lesson learned. But I can't wait for our conversation tonight. So please join me in welcoming the incomparable Jasmine Guillory to the stage.
There we go. Okay, yes, there we go. Perfect.
And I was saying earlier, my preferred thing to do for a mic check is to start with like a Whitney Houston song.
Oh, yeah, you can do that. I don't have that great of a singing voice, but why don't, I mean, if you want to.
I mean, I will always love you, but we'll get to that later. So as folks are writing down their questions, because everybody is going to do their homework as assigned, I have a few to start us off.
All right, let's go.
And first is, you are a prolific romance writer. Your name is really synonymous with the genre at this point. Why romance? What is the draw for you to write romance?
You know, it's interesting because when I first started writing, my first book that I wrote, which has never been published, isn't romance. I started writing and I wrote a young adult. I mean, it's young adult romance, but it was a young adult novel. I think partly because I was sort of writing for the books that I didn't have when I was growing up, right? Like, you know, when I was a teenager, there weren't a lot of books for and about like little Black girls. And so I sort of wanted to kind of write that book. And I started writing, and then I was like, oh, this is fun. I like doing this. And then just sort of kept going, but I hadn't, and with that book, like I, tried to get an agent and a publishing deal. I got a lot of like very positive rejections from agents with that one, but it really did like made me realize, because I really kind of started writing partly just to see if I would like it. I was a lawyer and did not really love my job and was thinking like, well, I've always loved reading, maybe I would like writing, and it turned out I really did. And then a few years later, I was going through a really hard time in my life, and I started reading a lot of romance and discovered that romance is great to read in hard times because, like, going in, like, it's gonna be happy at the end, and sometimes that is exactly what you need. And also, like, certain, like, I mean, look, romances they're like thriller romances and dark romances, but like, in general, if you're going into a romance and like someone like has a puppy's gonna be okay by the end of the book. And like there are times when you're like, if anything happens to that puppy, I am not going to survive it. And like that, and so I was reading a ton of romance, and eventually I was like, this might be kind of fun to write. And I started writing The Wedding Date and just had a ball writing it and kept going.
And I agree, the dog will always live.
Yeah.
The world might blow up. There
world
might
might
be
blow up.
explosions on every other page of this romance.
And someone is gonna throw their body over that dog. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe both of their bodies.
Yeah, maybe both of their bodies.
Is that too suggestive for the Des Moines Library? I don't know. So that was book one. How do you decide what to write next? What's kind of your process as you look at what you might want to do next?
It's funny because usually by the end of one book, I have sort of have an idea of what I want the next one to be. And sometimes I have an idea of like what I want the next few to be, and I don't really know in what order. But there's either, you know, because like my first 6 books, this was not intentional. My first 6 books are all related a little bit, and I had intended when I like the first 3 being related was sort of the plan, and then I kept having other ideas for other characters. So I was like, oh, I want to write something about them. So that, like, in general, that's kind of how it happens. Like, oh, I have an idea to write for that person who was intended to just to be like a side character, and then
they take on this whole world.
Yeah, right. And then they take on a whole world, and so.
I had that conversation with my editor recently, and I was like, but I want to keep going with these people.
Yeah.
She's like, well, are you going to put 0 side characters in the next book? And I was like, well, probably not.
No, probably not. Probably not. Yeah.
So in writing, do we have any writers in the room? A few folks? There are.
Okay, first of all, I saw a number of very tentative hands go up.
True.
And so what I will say about that is I had a conversation with like an established writer when I was very tentatively writing my first book. And like we'd been like friends on like online, on like we had friends in common, but we had never met in person. And she was in San Francisco, we met up for a drink, and she was like, oh, actually, like I don't even know, are you a writer? And I was like, well, and she was like, okay, if you write, then you're a writer. So that's what I will say to those of you who raised your very tentative hands. If you're right, then you're a writer.
Should we make you raise them again?
Yeah, let's do that again. Any writers in the room? Yeah,
Love
those are
it.
better hands. Yeah.
Okay, well, you all could answer this question as well. Would you say that you are somebody who plots, or are you a pantser, meaning you do not plot and write by the seat of your pants? Because we're writers.
Yeah.
We come up with these kinds of words.
Weird words. Okay, so I will say that, I mean, in general, I lean towards plotter. But that has evolved some from when I first started. Like, you know, when I first started, I had very detailed outlines at the beginning. And now and actually, so the second book that I tried to write, I was like, okay, well, lots of writers just have an idea and then they just write from that. I'm going to try to do that. That was a failure. I determined that I can't do that, which like some writers can do. I could not. Like I wrote the first half of that book 3 times because I didn't really know where I was going. And I still like it. So maybe someday I will go back to it. But and so now I know that I need like a kind of a detailed beginning for myself before I start, and then kind of a middle, and then kind of an end. And I just need those plans so that I know what I'm writing towards. But often I will like kind of have the outline of the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 chapters, and then an idea for a kind of middle. And then as I write the beginning ones, like I have more ideas on what will come in. Because a lot of times, like my detailed outlines would all fall apart once I kind of figure out who the characters were, and I was like, oh, well, they would never do that. And so I had to change things. What about you?
I am a pantser in my heart and soul.
Yeah.
I came up with an idea upstairs. Where's Katie? We came up with a whole book idea while we were having drinks upstairs, and I will go home and sit down and write that without a plan.
Amazing.
But in traditional publishing, if they're going to give you money, they actually want to know that you have a plan.
Okay, but here's the secret to that, though, right?
You can veer from it.
You can veer from it. The synopses that I wrote for, you know, because my first book, I got a 2-book deal for that book. So the synopses that I wrote for what ended up being my second and third books are very different from what the books turned out being. I mean, like, the idea is the same.
They're romances.
They're romances, and like the setup is the same, but a lot of things changed. Yeah.
So if you are new to writing, and you know it all works, everybody does all the things.
Yeah, we all figure it out.
You know, that was actually my next question, and we talked about sort of the plotting versus pantsing and sort of trusting your writer instincts. Is there anything else for you that's different now in how you write versus when you first started?
It's funny that you say trusting your writer instincts, because I feel like like I feel like every writer goes through this, but you have to like constantly remind yourself like it's part of the process. It's part of the process, because I never trust my writer instincts as I'm writing that first draft. I'm like, but why is this so terrible? Like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Have I ever written a book
Have I ever
before?
written a book before? And I mean, I do think like, okay, well, I finished books before, so maybe I can do it again. But it always feels like when you're like, I don't know, at the 40 or so % mark in a book, you're like, how did I do this before? So that, I mean, that is the good thing, is that I can remind myself I have done this before, so maybe I can do it again. And I do, like, my first drafts have always been messy. It's a little easier to let myself keep them messy, because I know, like, I have fixed this before. So maybe
That sounds like a problem for future me
yes,
to edit
exactly,
this.
exactly, yes. And I think I'm more willing to experiment. I think because initially I think I sort of was like, okay, like, I've listened to other people. There's a way to write a book. I'm going to try it that way. And now I've listened to enough writers. I'm like, oh, there are like many thousands of ways to write books. And each one for me has been a little bit different. And so I can like trust myself to try different things and see how it goes. But I, in the middle of the night, I'm still like, why did I do that? It's terrible. And sometimes that is like, why did I even start writing in the first place? But eventually we get there. But yeah.
You start Googling, like, what does a professional dog walker
Yes.
make? Is that something that I could maybe
Yes.
pivot to? But then you write the dog walker romance,
Yeah.
Love on a Leash,
Yeah.
coming 2027.
It's funny, a friend of mine has a romance with the dog walker coming soon. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
I love it. That was not our idea. Ideas.
It's not called Love on a Leash, but that's a good title. Save that.
Let's talk about titles. That's not on my list.
I was about to say, titles are terrible.
They are the worst. So for your titles, how many of them have changed kind of from beginning to end? How involved were you in that process?
So my first 3 books, I knew the title almost immediately, and they stayed the same. And those have been the only books where I knew the title, like, as I was writing the book. Like, all of the other books, I figured out the title later, and it's usually a group effort. Like, what book was it? I think maybe it was Drunk on Love. Yeah, it was Drunk on Love. That, like, that title, I did not come up with the title until I was in New York, I think for the Today Show, and like I had lunch with my publishing team, and they were like, okay, we need to come up with the title for this book, because we've been like trying for months. And so like 5 of us went into a conference room after lunch, we were like, we are going to come out of this with the title. And we did, but it took a while. And so, yeah, sometimes it's a real, like, what about you?
I have a spreadsheet of all of the different titles that were considered
Yeah.
for all of my books. How to Fail at Flirting, that was number 41.
Yeah.
And same thing, I was with my team.
Yeah.
It was actually on my birthday. We were in New York. We were at a restaurant for lunch. And so we've got champagne in front of us and like a birthday candle. And anybody watching us must have been very confused of what was happening.
Yeah.
Because we would be having this very animated conversation. And then someone would pitch an idea, and all of us would look 45 degrees off to the left. And be quiet for like 30 seconds longer than was comfortable. And then come back together and brainstorm. But yeah, almost always a group effort.
Oh my, yeah, it can sometimes take a while. And like with the wedding party, they had wanted to change that title because they were like, marketing thinks that it's too close to the wedding date. And I was like, okay, like let's brainstorm other titles. And we brainstormed a bunch of other titles, and like nobody liked them as well. So we were like, all right, well, we'll stick with the wedding party. And like, it's true, people get confused about those 2 titles all the time, but it's fine. Yeah. Like,
I mean, for a publishing company, it's not the worst thing if somebody buys a book twice.
Exactly. Right.
Just kidding, but not.
Yeah, why not?
Okay, I'm going to eloquently balance everything
Okay,
here
you
with
can do it.
some questions from the audience. And actually, this segues into a
Move your water
question.
so that you can put something down
Oh,
if you
thanks.
need to.
That is more thought out than my plan. So we'll start out here, and I think this segues into my next question anyway, but not a question, but thank you for writing books representing Black women in a positive context.
Oh, thank you, whoever wrote that question.
I think you do that beautifully. And so can you talk a little bit about that decision to center Black women or maybe other representation that's important for you as you're building your characters and your worlds?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's funny because it never occurred to me. I've loved reading my whole life. I was talking earlier, people from the library, about how I grew up going to the library and started reading when I was 3 years old, and my parents both loved books. But it never occurred to me to start writing until relatively late in life. And I think part of that was because I didn't grow up reading books about people who looked like me. So I kind of never even thought of writing anything, because it was like, well, like, those books don't exist. And then after a while I was like, oh wait, but those books do exist. Maybe I can write one. Because it never, like, I would have never wanted to write books that didn't feel that, like, weren't about Black women, right? And so once I did start writing them, it just felt so right. And it also felt like, because, so much of what we see in the media about, like, life in America as a Black person is, like, about struggle and pain and, hardship. And, like, those things do exist, but there is also joy and love and family. And those are the things that I experience all the time. And so I wanted to be able to both write that for me and write that for other people who need books like that. And I think, even during the pandemic, like, the worst parts of the pandemic, first of all, sales of romance novels skyrocketed because everybody needed books that was going to make them feel better. And also, like, writing about joy really helped me during the hardest times. And so I think, like, we all need more joy in our lives, and more joy that, like, represents ourselves and our families and, like, our existence.
And I think for folks who haven't yet picked up your first book by Jasmine, because as we mentioned, they are on sale over here from Beaverdale Books. I think what you'll also see is a lot of intersectionality as well. We see body size diversity in your characters. We see profession and education diversity, age, because folks over 50 can get it and do. And fat folks do too, and lawyers do, and doctors do. And so I think that you see that really well in your books, and we do see that, like, cross-section of where people are and who they are.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
And if you don't know that for yourself yet, you can purchase a book over here. Next question. The Wedding Date was the book that got me reading again as an adult. What were some of your formative novels as a person and as an author?
Oh my goodness, I have so many. I grew up reading, like, strangely, a lot of books about orphan girls. I don't know if I do like my family, I swear. I don't know if there's just a lot of books about orphan girls or if I was simply attracted to those, but, the Anne of Green Gables books, love them. I did not, until I was, like, an adult, discover other people who had read these specific books, but they're the Shoes books that are set in England, like, between the wars, and then I think during World War II, about, like, orphan girls who go to dancing school. And I was like, I loved those books. Books that aren't about orphan girls. The Betsy Tacy books was obsessed with. I also loved Madeline Langle's books. So a lot of, like, the books that I read as a child were really my formative books that have, like, I still reread frequently. Yeah.
Well, never mind. We'll get back to that.
Okay.
The orphan girl thing. Then I'm like, what books could we write around that?
I'm sure there are a lot more probably if I go back and look through my childhood bookshelf.
It's okay to have a type.
Yeah.
This one's for both of us. Do either of you write your book's first draft by hand? Maybe with fountain pens. That was very specific, whoever wrote that. I love it, and I also love your handwriting and the pen that you use. So do you ever handwrite first drafts or any part of your...
So yes. So, and this is something that I actually did for the first time with the first book that I wrote during the pandemic. In 2020, I had a book due in October that I had planned to start working on at this writer's retreat that I was the author in residence for in March of 2020. And we got to the writer's retreat and we're all sitting there at dinner, drinking wine together, and somebody looks down at their phone and it's Tom Hanks has coronavirus, the NBA just shut down. It was that night. And I was happening. I did not start writing a book that week or for a number of other weeks. But then eventually I was okay, I'm going to have to start. I mean, I was more I have to do something other than curl up in the fetal position. And so I was I can't start writing a book. That seems too overwhelming. I'm just going to write something in the notebook. And so, which ended up being while we were dating. But I did not, for a long time, I was just I'm just writing in this notebook, it's fine. And then eventually I was okay, well, I guess this is gonna be a book, so I have to start typing it up. But at that point, I was just too, deep into it. So I was still, typing and also handwriting. So I handwrote the entire first draft of that book. My handwriting is terrible. And so, as I'm typing it up, I'm what word was I writing right there? But I've since done that. I also handwrote the first draft of Drunk on Love. And then with the current book that I'm working on, I sort of handwrote a lot of parts of it, but then I started typing that earlier because I discovered that when you're halfway through a book and you start typing it up, it's a nightmare. But yes, so I have not with fountain pen because my ink would get everywhere. I'm not good at that. Yeah.
It's a different.
And also when you're, my first drafts are very long and messy. So if you're 100,000 words in a notebook, that's a lot of ink. You go through just a lot of pens, and I feel fountain ink is a lot more expensive. Yeah.
A lot of tax considerations here. I do not handwrite. I have written a couple of scenes, but that was mostly because they came to me while I was sitting in a meeting at my work, my former work. I don't work there anymore, so I can tell that story, and I just had to get it out. Sometimes I will narrate them. I can't think of the word. Dictate it into my phone as well. But I always wanted to be one of those folks who could handwrite. And
no, I will say
how beautiful my handwriting is I write these beautiful words, and then I'm but I could make a shopping list and I could doodle. It doesn't work for me.
No, I mean, it's mostly terrible because the typing it up, okay, so the typing it up is bad, but it also ends up being sort of a 1.5 draft when you're typing it up because this is why I've still done it, because then there's I figure stuff out, and so I'm I can fix certain things, or when I was in the middle of working on Drunk on Love, I was pretty behind in typing it up, and I was still midway through the draft, and so I took myself on a mini writing retreat. I was I'm just going to a hotel for 3 nights, and I'm just going to type the rest, as much as I can in this book. And then I sort of figured out a whole because I was why do I keep saying this one thing? And I figured out a whole major plot fix, and I was well, this is why I handwrote, so I would go back So it's good in some ways, also terrible in other ways.
I'm gonna find a really good hand-friendly fountain pen to send you with their next the next release gift.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem. It's terrible for my hands too. I already have to sleep with wrist braces on because it's
I think most of the authors I know have at least 4 or 5 different wrist braces stashed in different places around their home, just for casual use and fashion.
Yeah.
But writing in the worst of the pandemic, when we were all quarantined, when there was lockdown, that was the Wild West. It was odd to write romance. In that moment. I wrote my 3rd book while my 3-year-old was next to me watching Paw Patrol, and I just needed adult conversation, so I read all the love scenes first.
Yeah.
Which one might argue it didn't start as a book, just a series. activities,
Yes.
but it was wild
Yeah.
to write happy ever after and
Yes.
love stories in times that were fairly dark. And you might say like we're still kind of in that.
Yeah.
So for you, how do you do that? How do you navigate kind of the darkness in the world and still write these love stories that bring light?
I think part of it is like I was a romance reader first, right? And so there have been times when, like, I remember once, like, I don't even remember what was going on in the world at the time, but it was something bad. There's been lots of, not great things over the past few years, but like something terrible was happening on the news, and I was writing and I was thinking like, oh, like this seems so unimportant right now with all of this going on. And then I was also in the middle of reading a romance, and like a romance by another Black woman, and I was like, yes, this is exactly what I need, like to uplift me and to make me feel like life is worth fighting for, right? Like that there are good things in this world, because like it's not just the bad things we see on TV. Like we have to remember the good things in order to keep going. And so that's like one of the things that helps keep me going.
That was a really wonderful place for applause, not only because your answer was beautiful, but because we're going to take a pretty sharp pivot here.
Okay, all right.
So some of your books are more explicit and some leave more to the reader's imagination. What informs that choice, and how does consent come into your writing as you're thinking about that?
Yeah, so some of it is definitely just like about the characters. It's talking about while we were dating. I mean, I think part of like that is definitely my the book that I would least want to give to like my friend's 12-year-old, for instance. But I think that's because like those two characters are just people who just wanted to do it all the time. And so that's what they did in the book. And so then there are characters where like their relationship takes a little while longer and it's a little bit, more of a slow burn. I will say like, by the book is my one book that it's not by Penguin Random House, it's by Disney, and because it's through they have a series, another one is coming out soon that's sort of like reimaginings of the Disney princesses, and princesses do not have sex on the page. I was told. So that informed that decision, but and I mean, for me, like consent plays a pretty big role, because I think it's really important for me for like both people to be really into it. Like that makes it much more fun for the reader and for the writer, right? And so there's lots of different ways to do that, and I love seeing the ways other writers do it. And certain things can be verbal and certain things can be like an eyebrow raise or whatever, but I think for me that plays a big role in everything that goes on between a couple.
I agree. It has so much to do with who the characters are and how it moves the story forward.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes for romance authors, we generally tend to embrace physical intimacy and embrace physical intimacy. See what I did there? Not intentional. But we also know how much of human emotion can be, not always is, but can be communicated through that. And so as a writer, from a craft standpoint, I can have them have a whole conversation while they're getting up to some stuff that might be much more meaningful than if they just had it like while they were in line buying gum.
Yes, right.
I mean, maybe both could, they don't have to be mutually exclusive, both could be true. But as we look at romance is known for tropes. Tropes exist in all forms of genre fiction, but in romance, we have some pretty specific tropes. So the question is, do you have a favorite trope? But I'm just actually gonna list a few.
Okay.
And you can give it an enthusiastic thumbs up or thumbs down, or just throw your microphone at me.
Okay.
So fake dating.
My favorite, obviously.
The rake and the ingenue.
I'm a big fan of that one. Yeah.
Secret baby. No. Why we get along.
Secret Baby is really my least favorite. I will say though, in the hands of a really great writer, and I can like any trope, but I will read fake dating by anybody. Whereas Secret Baby, I have to like have read your book before and really trust you.
I have to owe you money. Yeah. I also love the expression of the non-romance readers in the room when I said secret
I know,
baby.
that is the one that gets all that. They're like, what is she talking about? Every single time. It's like, secret baby. Yeah.
Okay, how about, it's not really a trope, but monster romance, where
Okay.
the characters maybe are not human.
I have never read a monster romance, but I have a lot of friends who are really into them. So I'm open to the idea. I'll try one, but I've never read that.
That's sometimes how the book starts.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not going to invite me back. How about Marriage of Convenience?
Oh, I love Marriage of Convenience. There was definitely a time, like, when like I was going through some stuff, I was reading a whole lot of romances, and I was Googling like lists of Marriage of Convenience romance novels and read basically every book on the list. Love them.
And they are hard to write in a
Yeah.
contemporary setting
Yeah.
because there really aren't a lot of reasons you need to fake marry somebody in 2024. It's always to save the family business.
Okay, no, but that's one of them. No, but what was it yesterday? I read about one that's coming soon where it's like immigration. Yeah, okay.
Yes,
I'll read it.
there. Mariana Zapata did a beautiful one where he's Canadian. So, flip the script a little bit on what we maybe think about with immigration. We'll come back to tropes because I got a long list of them. But we have a lot of your questions. So how has the romance genre or publishing in general changed since you started writing?
I think people are like, there's a lot more, like, romance has always been a very popular genre. And I think finally both publishing and like bookstores are realizing that. Like before The Wedding Date came out, and for like years before that, when I was reading romance, I would never go into bookstores and see romance, especially not indie bookstores, like sometimes in Barnes & Noble. But like indie bookstores, I would never see like tables full of romance. And now I never not see tables full of romance at indie bookstores. And so that's really exciting to me. I think publishing is doing a better job of embracing romance. They could do a lot better job. We can talk about that, but publishing has been a lot more, I feel like romance sort of used to be like the embarrassing stepsister, and now it's a lot more embraced and welcomed. So that's been very good to see.
It's the wealthy stepsister now, and so no shade to any stepsisters
I will
in the
say
room.
maybe rich auntie.
Rich auntie, yes, is more inclusive, probably. And we could probably talk a whole lot more about publishing. That's for like the after AViD.
Yeah, that's my after party. Yeah.
Drink, the after party. This one was for both of us, but have you ever looked over and seen someone reading your book and realized the reader didn't know who you were? What did you do?
I've never seen someone reading my book, which it's like I'm obviously always looking out for that. And like I've had friends text me like that they're somewhere and they see someone reading my book, and I'm always like that is always the dream. But yes, I've never seen that. I've never like seen it in the wild.
I haven't either, although I have a very healthy, some might say too healthy self-confidence. So I assume if they're on an e-reader and I can't see it.
Oh, I'm always like yesterday on the plane, I kept walking by a woman who was like reading on her iPad, and I was trying really hard to walk slowly to see what she was reading.
Okay, but sort of in a way, someone has read over my shoulder on a plane. And he was a very lovely gentleman. He told me all about how much he loved Dean Koontz. But he was definitely reading something that was not
meant for
his eyes. And so he did read that book, quite a bit of it before I caught on. How about, is there a time you've been recognized in kind of an unexpected space?
Let's see. Once I was at, what's very funny is I live in Oakland, California, which is where I grew up. And so usually if someone recognizes me, it's like someone I went to middle school with, right? Because I look exactly the same as I have since I was like 7, except just older. And so it is like, so usually if someone says my name and I turn around, I'm like, do we go to 4th grade together? And so I'm always surprised if it's like someone who like knows me from writing. But one time I saw I was at JFK Airport, and someone like said, and I thought I had dropped something, and she was like, "Oh, I've read your books," and I was like, "Really?" Like it was so nice. But yeah.
I was plotting like a whole book there. Like
Oh,
you
and
run into
actually,
somebody
okay,
from
I
middle
think
school and
one of my friends over here, I think, also has a story because we were in Boston together, and I had just done an event the night before, and we were walking down the street, and a car drove down the street and like yelled out the window my name, which was very sweet. I don't remember. There was no one who recognized me at the spa.
see, that's a flex when you don't even have to notice that other people notice you and your friends can just pick up on it. You know, the first time that ever happened to me, I was at a bookstore in Portland, the giant, massive
Powell's.
Yes, Powell's. And I was there for work and just buying a bunch of romance novels, as I tend to do. And somebody said, "Excuse me, I don't want to bother you, but are you Denise Williams?" And I made her take like 15
Yeah,
selfies with me.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is an interesting question. Do you think AI is going to change writing novels? And are you using AI or considering it?
I mean, I can't, I feel like maybe I don't know enough about AI, but I can't imagine what I would really use it for. I, like, I think a lot of writers are pretty worried right now about what AI is going to do. I spend so much time already worrying about things that are totally out of my control, especially having to do with publishing, that I have like just decided that I'm not going to worry about AI, that I can't do it. Other people can worry about that and then like update me in a few years and tell me what I need to worry about. But I mean, I know that like publishers have used it for like things like translation, which I think is not great for translators who have those jobs. And also I feel like translation is tricky because you can't just like, if you've ever used Google Translate and then seen someone who is fluent in that language, they're like, or you like accidentally say something really off color. So I don't think it's quite good enough yet for us to worry, but maybe, you know, knock on wood when I say that.
I'm sort of in the same boat, and maybe that is the privilege of being traditionally published.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Penguin's got this.
Yeah. So,
They have people on
they have
it.
people figuring this out. I will.
They go find our pirated books and get them shut down. And maybe we shouldn't necessarily just, blankly trust that. But I used ChatGPT to try to brainstorm my last book title. We were having a hard time. My friend Emily is here, and we were teaching a class on romance novels at the time. Students came up with horrible ideas. So we went to ChatGPT, and they were awful. So in some ways, I think that authors are safe in their creativity. This is a spicy question, or it could be spicy. Would you consider writing a romance novel about 75-year-olds?
I mean, look, never say never. First of all, as I was just don't tell my mother I told you the story, although knowing my mother, actually, she wouldn't care. As I was just telling my friends at dinner, my mother, who is not quite there, but is in her 70s, just discovered Jello shots a few weekends ago and is real into it. She was at a big party. Her nephew was had just finished some big fancy military thing, and she was at a big party at his house, and they were serving Jello shots, and then she just they started playing I Will Survive, which someone should have stopped them from doing that, and my mother got up and serenaded the crowd. So I feel like that's the beginning of a romance novel if someone falls in love right there. So yeah, having hung out with my mom and her friends, 70-year-olds are fun. So yeah.
I think nothing's off the table.
Yeah.
I also think whoever asked that, if you happen to be 75, you could write it.
Yeah, you should write it. I'll read it.
Because I do think there's something to be said for authenticity.
Yes.
I think this every time I try to write a 22-year-old. And I have to Google, what
does Riz
cool?
mean?
How do you say cool if you're 22? What is the translation? And I'm like, maybe I should not be writing this age group anymore. So similarly, if you want to tell the story, I think write it. Because there's a lot of readers who are hungering for older characters who are over 40, who are over 50, who are over 60, who are over 70, maybe over 80, 90, I don't know. But I'm sure that they are hungering for them because there are not many books out there.
Yep.
And this is really switching to writing. So when you write a messy draft as a first-time writer, is that submittable? I will say no, it is not, and let you elaborate.
No, I mean, my first drafts are very messy. Nobody sees them. And also partly because once I'm at the end of a first draft, I already know a lot of things that I'm gonna do to fix it, and so I fix as much as I can of a draft before sending it out. I did that pretty early on, but I still even when I already have a deal and have an editor, there's a lot of stuff I fix before sending it to her, because partly I want to get the story as right in my head and on the paper as I can, but also I don't want to waste somebody else's time if I know and for me that's part of the fun part, is doing that work to figure it out, because getting to the end of the messy first draft, I'm like, oh, okay, now I have all the pieces, how can I put them together in a way that kind of matches that vision in my head. And so that's a lot of the interesting part. But I'd say fix as much as you can before sending it to anyone. And I also think this is where you meet other writers and exchange work, and kind of they explain to you what doesn't make sense and what you need to fix, or have ideas. Because also a lot of times talking to my editor, she's not telling me what to fix. She'll have ideas for what's missing or how to fix a plot hole, but sometimes it's that as I think as someone says, editors are often wrong about how to fix something, but they're always right about what's not working. And so when oftentimes it's she's explaining to me, in this part, what if you did this? And what she means is this thing is missing, and what you need is either another connection or something else, and it helps me kind of figure out how to do it. And sometimes her solution is right, sometimes it's wrong, but always talking through it helps.
And this person asked about it being submittable, so I'm looking at that from a maybe traditionally published standing. You're sending it to an editor or a literary agent. It is competitive. It's very competitive. And so you want to make sure that you are submitting, especially as a new writer, you don't have your foot in the door yet, or a new published writer anyway, that you are putting that best foot forward, because sometimes you don't get a second chance with that editor or that agent or that book. And so in addition to making it the best story you can, know that you want to just put that best foot forward, because you're entering an industry that is competitive.
Yeah.
Especially post-COVID and getting a literary agent, the stakes are up, and that's not to scare anybody, but put that best work out there. Write that 75-year-old romance that is gonna shake the world up and just have us all hot and bothered, and run it through a beta reader first. So that can be really beneficial. Well, along that same lines, what do you need to have prepared to submit a successful, we'll say manuscript, I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay, so I'll explain how I did it, how it worked for me. So when I wrote The Wedding Date, I wrote it, spent a while editing it, exchanged with friends, got notes, and then edited some more. And then I started reaching out to agents. And so in general, when you're looking for an agent for fiction, things work a little differently for nonfiction. But for fiction, you send an agent what's called a query letter. And so it's usually here's, this is kind of a 2-sentence thing about what this book is. And then you have a longer paragraph that's more think of it as when you read the back of a book, that's kind of what it's supposed to look like describing, what the story is, and what kind of the, what's gonna want someone to keep reading. And I had a list of agents who I wanted to reach out to, either because they represented other romances that I felt fit within kind of what I wanted, or they were at agencies that also represented those books, that kind of thing. So I had started making a list. Often people will thank their agent in the acknowledgments, and so that's a good way to kind of start making your list. So I had started a spreadsheet kind of long before I was ready to query, I would just like throw names in there when I read a book or when I was sort of looking around. And then when I was like had a query letter ready, and then I like started really going through that list and figuring that out. And usually they will want the query letter and then, you know, either like the first chapter or the first 10 pages or something. So you have to have the book like all ready, because sometimes that they will then say like, send me the whole book, and you want to be able to like press send right away. But usually, and sometimes people will want a synopsis, which is usually like a page, 2 pages, 3 pages, somewhere. I'm always confused because everybody has a slightly different rule on that, but usually that's basically all you have to have ready.
And your
The
query,
book is the most important thing, yeah.
your query is a pitch. Imagine having the cutest dog, the cutest, smartest dog in the world, like the opposite of my dog. You have this dog, and you need to convince other people this is the cutest, smartest dog in the world, and you get to show them a picture of their paw. That's it. So you have to get the lighting right. You got to paint their nail. Like, you know, you have to really capture your book and boil it down. And so if your book is ready to go and it's polished, that makes it that much easier. And then you get other friends to read and edit your query letter.
And it's also very helpful because I had friends read my query letter who like had also read the book, so that was helpful. But it was also very helpful to have friends read it who knew nothing about what I'd been writing, because then they could say like, well, but what about like, because sometimes if you write something already, your mind will make the jump, like but then if you haven't read it, you're like, well, but that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would she do this? And you're like, oh, right, I forgot to put that sentence in. And so, like, I think having a few eyes on things is very helpful.
And I don't know, you can talk about your experience with this. I think the author community is pretty open, and especially the romance author community. And I think that's only grown in the last, 5-6 years. But I have like talked to other authors, established authors, like authors who should not have given me the time of day, honestly, who read my query for me or who listened to my pitch. And I've turned around and tried to do that for other authors. And so if there's somebody you really admire, like reach out to them. James Patterson might not reply, but they might.
Yeah.
Because I think authors generally are very excited to help other folks navigate this kind of winding path.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because also it's not like, like when you're applying to college, right? There's somebody at your high school who tells you what the process is and all of that. When you're like trying to get published, there's there's a lot of stuff on the internet which sometimes is very wrong, and so a lot of people just have no idea how to start. And I think a lot of authors really want to help people like explain the process and figure that out because it can be so mystifying.
Also, it helps us procrastinate whatever we're supposed to be writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it feels like, but I'm doing work.
Yeah. I'm watching Netflix. I might like come up with a book idea. This is work. Okay, if you could pick an actor to play Luke, who would it be? Hint, please say young Morris Chestnut. LOL.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's a perfect idea. The problem is I am terrible at casting questions. I think partly because like I never remember actors' names. So I'm always like, oh, that guy that was in the show where he was with you. I mean, but if you guys have ideas, I love them. Yeah.
I'm the same way, and then someone will fan cast one of my books, and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, great idea. Yeah, that's great.
I never thought about that. And then I have to remember what hair color did I give them in the book. I don't remember.
Yeah.
So how do you feel your novels evolve through audiobook narration?
It's interesting because I had never been a big audiobook person. And then talking about dogs, I got a puppy last year. And so now I go for walks a lot and have started listening to audiobooks. And now I'm much more like, I care a lot more about audiobook narration than I ever did before. And like narrators really make a huge difference. Like when I was, when I picked narrators for other books, I have friends who I knew listened to a lot of audiobooks. And so I would send them like clips of the narrators and say like, what do you think? And now I have real thoughts. But yeah, I think they can really make, like change a lot about like how people relate to the book and make you feel, because it feels like, I think many of you who listen to audiobooks will know the name Julia Whalen, who is an incredible writer and audiobook narrator. And I did an event with her for her most recent book, and she said that, like, because a lot of people in the audiobook community, like the narrators, were worried when the pandemic hit because a lot of people would listen to audiobooks when commuting, and they were like, are people going to stop listening to audiobooks? We don't know. And then, like, a lot of people listen to more audiobooks, and she said that, like, she got letters from people saying, like, I live alone. I've been alone in my house for so many weeks. You're the only person whose, like, voice that I've listened to. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. And so I think, it's so, like, I think it's so heartwarming to me, the many different ways that we can connect through books.
I agree. And I actually came to romance through audiobooks during my commute. And so when it came to pick narrators for any of my books, I am super high maintenance. I have lots of thoughts, which is kind of nice because now they sort of just trust that I know a little bit of what I'm talking about. But meeting narrators is amazing.
I find actually that it's very good to be high maintenance starting out.
Just generally in life.
Generally. Because then they'll be like, well, she's going to be picky about stuff. It's fine. We'll just keep going.
It's very true.
Yeah.
But narrators, many of them are voice actors. They're doing other things. They're stage actors, and they're phenomenal. And so when I meet them, I fangirl hard. Yeah. Like, I was at Steamy Lit Con at the conference last August, and somebody was kind of fangirling over me, and I was like, what are you doing? I am just a regular person. And then Shane East walked in. Oh my goodness, I lost the capability to speak. And he hugged me, and his voice was touching my face. Yeah. and I lost all capability to speak. And he's narrated my books before, like, we've worked together. But it's that idea that the celebrity and this voice I've come to know so well. So there's so much power in it.
No, I asked Julia, like, has anyone ever recognized you in public because of your voice? And she said, no, because my normal voice is not my, like, narrating voice. But I would be fascinated to hear if anyone was like,
I will also
standing in line for something,
And I'm guilty of it because I just talked about Shanice. But men narrators in romance get all of the flowers, and women are doing so much work. January Lavoie, I also got to hug, and she also breathed on my face, like, not in a weird way. But I think that there's a gender dynamic there too, in terms of what we listen to and what we think of, which again is probably for the after AViD. So which of your characters do you feel is most like you?
I feel like I put a little bit of myself into all of my characters, which, and it's hard because, like, I started writing, I wrote The Wedding Date in 2015. And then, like, I have been sort of writing ever since. And so each of my characters is, there are things that are like me, but, like, some of those things have changed about me, and then they're still there about my characters. So, and sometimes, when I'm trying to figure out a character, it's most helpful for me to either think, like, sometimes it's like, well, what would I do in this situation? But it's also like, do I know someone who has been in a similar situation, and how did they approach it? And so there's, like, lots of bits of, like, good friends of mine or family in all of my characters, because I sort of think about, like, how do real people deal with these things, or how do real people act in a way that's, like, specific and also relatable.
So I have one more audience question and then a final question as we wrap up. What's on the horizon for you? Next book, or something you're excited about, or whatever you can share?
I do have another book coming. It has been a little while, but hopefully we will have information to disseminate about that soon. But it will probably be out next spring. So that is all I can tell you about that. But it is coming, I promise. It took a little while. I wrote 3 books back to back to back during the pandemic, and then I had to take a little break.
Live on a leash must wait.
Yeah.
So this is looking a little farther afield, but if you think about your career and you forecast, say, 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, what do you want folks to know you for when you're maybe moving toward the later part of your career?
That is a really great question. I don't know. I still like, I just want people to think about my books and feel like they brought them some joy. Right? Like that is something that has meant the most to me when readers tell me that, either when, when they were going through a hard time and needed that joy, or just like something made them laugh or made them smile. Like that is the stuff that really makes such a difference to me when I hear it. And so I would love for people to think of my books and to think of me in that way.
It has been absolutely joyful to
It's been
speak to you.
wonderful to talk to you. Thank you, Denise. Well,
I was going to instruct you all to give a round of applause, but you're such excellent students, you didn't even need that. We are so thankful that you all could join us for this event tonight.
thank you all so much. You've been so great. I can't believe there's so many of you here. That's lovely.
And we're so glad that Jasmine made the trip to Iowa. We'll have you back anytime.
I will come back
Sandwiches,
anytime.
It's a whole thing.
I will come back. I said I'll come back anytime. Maybe I am from California, so maybe not in February. Maybe not in February.
Fair,
I'm
but
a very tender. I can't. I don't know how to. I don't even own boots. Okay. I mean, I don't.
But in August, we do have a cow carved out of butter.
Oh,
Just
you
something
know
to
what?
think about.
Look, I have heard about the butter cow, and I want to see it. So
I actually
would,
think
Yeah.
the people watching at the Iowa State
Yeah.
Fair is much more impressive than what
Yeah,
you sculpted
yeah.
out of butter. But I digress.
Yeah.
So Jasmine will be signing, and you're welcome to buy one or many of her books from Beaverdale Books over here with Hunter after the event. Thank you again for coming. Please consider supporting the Library
Thank
Foundation.
you all so much.
And have a great rest of your night.